Mary Tudor entered the world on February 18th, 1516, in Greenwich Palace. The only surviving child of King Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Her birth was a bittersweet event. While she secured the Tudor line, her father's desperate desire for a male heir would eventually shatter her childhood. At first, Mary was cherished, recognized as the Princess of Wales, and given a humanist education rarely afforded to women of the age. She played the lute, danced with elegance, and spoke Latin, Spanish, and French with remarkable fluency. But beneath this promising beginning, the storm clouds of family conflict brewed. Henry VIII's determination to divorce Catherine and Mary and Boleyn threw Mary into a political and personal nightmare. Declared illegitimate after her parents' marriage was annulled, Mary was stripped of her royal title and forced to serve as a lady-in-waiting to her half-sister, the infant Elizabeth. For years, Mary lived under the shadow of humiliation, cut off from her mother, who died in 1536, an event that devastated her and hardened her resolve. Under Anne Boleyn's rise and fall, Mary endured psychological pressure to acknowledge her father as the head of the Church of England and reject the Pope's authority. She refused, clinging stubbornly to her Catholic faith. This unyielding devotion to Rome would define her rule and, in the eyes of her enemies, doom her legacy. When Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour, bore him a son, the future Edward VI, Mary was forced to reconcile with her father to regain a place at court. Yet the scars of her youth, marked by betrayal and political manipulation, would never fade. Edward's reign after Henry's death intensified her religious isolation. As a staunch Protestant, Edward introduced sweeping reforms that threatened the Catholic tradition Mary held sacred. Her resistance made her a dangerous figure in the eyes of the Protestant elite, but among Catholic subjects, she became a beacon of hope. When Edward VI died in 1553, a Protestant coup tried to install Lady Jane Grey on the throne. Mary, showing rare Tudor steel, rallied supporters, marched to London, and claimed her birthright as England's first reigning queen. For a moment, it seemed like a triumph of resilience. The daughter who had been cast aside now wore the crown. But that victory carried the seeds of tragedy. Mary inherited a divided kingdom, a fragile crown, and an unforgiving political climate. Her deep faith would lead her into policies that alienated many, while her personal desire for love and legacy would pull her toward dangerous alliances. As history would show, Mary's reign was not destined for peace. It would be defined by blood, fire, and, ultimately, a death so strange that centuries later, scholars would still puzzle over what truly ended the life of England's first queen regnant. Mary Tudor's coronation on October 1st, 1553, was a spectacle of triumph. Crowds cheered as she processed through the streets of London in a golden gown, her crown glittering under a canopy of cloth of gold. For many, her rise to power was a restoration of rightful rule, the legitimate daughter of Henry VIII taking her father's throne. Yet, even on that bright autumn day, ominous signs flickered beneath the pageantry. England was fractured. The Protestant Reformation, pushed forward by Henry's break from Rome and Edward's fervent reforms, had embedded itself in the nation's political and religious life. Mary's pledge to restore Catholicism was not a mere ceremonial promise. It was a mission she believed came directly from God. Her first acts as queen reflected this determination. Protestant bishops were removed and imprisoned. The Latin Mass returned. England formally reconciled with the papacy, undoing decades of religious upheaval. Many Catholics rejoiced, believing England's soul had been saved. But to Protestants, this was a regression, a reversal of progress, and a warning of darker times ahead. Mary's personal life quickly became a subject of national concern. She was 37, unmarried, and childless, a dangerous combination for a monarch in an era obsessed with dynastic security. In a controversial decision, she agreed to marry Philip of Spain, son of Emperor Charles V. The match promised a strong Catholic alliance, but sparked fear that England would become a satellite of the Spanish Empire. The wedding, held in July 1554, was lavish but coldly received by her subjects. Anti-Spanish sentiment boiled into open rebellion earlier that year in Wyatt's Rebellion, a Protestant-led uprising aimed at stopping the marriage. Mary's response was resolute. She rallied Londoners with a fiery speech at the Guildhall, declaring she would stand and fight for her crown. to live and die amongst you all. The rebellion collapsed, and Mary's courage in that moment earned grudging respect. However, the alliance with Spain proved disappointing. Philip spent little time in England and showed little personal affection for his wife. Still, Mary believed the child would secure both her throne and her religious mission. In 1555, joy swept the court when Mary announced she was pregnant. Preparations for the birth began, and foreign ambassadors wrote eagerly to their courts about the expected heir. But months passed without the child's arrival. Physicians revised due dates, then whispered in confusion. Eventually, it became clear there was no baby. Mary had suffered what is now believed to be a phantom pregnancy. The public embarrassment was immense, and her enemies used it to paint her as delusional, cursed, or even divinely punished. Undeterred, Mary pressed forward with her religious agenda. The return to Catholicism came with brutal enforcement. Between 1555 and 1558, nearly 300 Protestants were burned at the stake for heresy, including prominent bishops like Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, and Thomas Cranmer. The public executions earned her the enduring nickname Bloody Mary, a label that would overshadow her other accomplishments. Behind the stern mask of the Queen, however, cracks were beginning to form. The years of political struggle, personal disappointment, and growing unpopularity would soon take a toll not only on her reign, but on her very body. By 1556, Mary I's reign was weighed down by disappointment and unrest. Her marriage to Philip of Spain had failed to bring the closeness or stability she had hoped for. Philip spent long stretches abroad, attending to his duties in the vast Spanish Empire. When he did return, it was more for political necessity than affection, leaving Mary increasingly lonely in the gilded halls of her court. Her phantom pregnancy had been a crushing humiliation. What should have been the joyous birth of a Catholic heir had instead turned into public embarrassment and gossip. Court whispers hinted at divine displeasure or witchcraft. Others mocked her as a desperate, aging woman clinging to false hope. Yet, Mary still longed for a child, believing it would redeem her personally and secure her Catholic restoration. She threw herself into her religious mission with renewed fervor. England's reconciliation with Rome was complete, and papal authority was restored. But enforcing it came a high human cost. Protestant dissenters faced imprisonment, exile, or death. The burnings at Smithfield became a grim feature of her reign, fueling anti-Catholic sentiment and hardening her reputation as Bloody Mary. Economically, England was struggling. Harvest failures led to food shortages, driving up prices and creating hardship for the poor. The draining expenses of war and Philip's foreign campaigns strained the treasury. In 1557, England entered into conflict with France alongside Spain. The move was unpopular, and the war ended disastrously with the loss of Calais, England's last continental possession, in January 1558. The symbolic blow was devastating. "When I am dead and opened," Mary reportedly said, "you shall find Calais lying in my heart." As political misfortune piled up, Mary's health began to falter. She suffered frequent bouts of fever, headaches, and severe stomach pains. Some reported swelling in her abdomen, raising hopes and later fears of another pregnancy. Once again, the signs faded, suggesting either another phantom pregnancy or an underlying illness. The uncertainty only deepened the court's unease. Mary's emotional state grew darker. The absence of Philip, the scorn of her enemies, and the unrelenting challenges of her reign weighed heavily upon her. Letters to her husband revealed a woman desperate for companionship and validation. Philip's responses, polite but distant, offered little comfort. By mid-1558, it was evident that the Queen was seriously ill. Her physicians could not agree on the cause. Some suspected dropsy, a condition involving severe fluid retention. Others feared a malignant tumor or an incurable wasting disease. Rumors swirled, whispers of poison, divine retribution, or a curse. In an age when medical knowledge was limited, the mystery of her illness only added to the sense that the Queen's fate was intertwined with the supernatural. Mary, however, remained steadfast in her duties. Even in failing health, she insisted on attending council meetings and overseeing state affairs. Yet her once commanding presence had diminished. She appeared gaunt, pale, and weakened. As autumn deepened into the damp chill of an English winter, it became clear that her reign and her life were nearing their end. By October 1558, Mary I's physical deterioration was undeniable. Her energy was spent, her voice faint, and her movements slow. Courtiers whispered about her haggard appearance. The once vibrant woman, now reduced to a shadow of her former self. Her skin, once fair, seemed sallow and tinged with a strange, ashen hue. She spent more time in her private chambers, attended by a small circle of loyal ladies and physicians. Pain racked her body, making even the simplest movements exhausting. Her legs and abdomen appeared swollen, perhaps from dropsy, and she often struggled to breathe. She suffered night sweats, fevers, and persistent nausea. Some observers noted a faint discoloration of her lips and fingertips, a detail that would later fuel speculation about poisoning. Despite her decline, Mary tried to keep her focus on the succession. She had no child and knew that her half-sister Elizabeth, a Protestant, was next in line. It was a bitter reality, for Mary feared Elizabeth would undo her religious reforms. Yet she had little choice but to accept the inevitable. Her last months were marked by a second phantom pregnancy. Early in 1558, Mary was convinced she was with child. She arranged preparations for the birth, confident that God had granted her a miracle. But as before, the swelling and other symptoms faded without a child. This final disappointment crushed her spirit. News from abroad worsened her mood. Philip, now King of Spain after his father's abdication, had married Elizabeth of Valois, a French princess. Though politically motivated, the match humiliated Mary and confirmed that she would never be his priority. Her counselors, seeing her failing strength, began quietly preparing for Elizabeth's accession. Mary, aware of their shifting loyalties, withdrew further into herself. As November approached, her illness worsened. Fever gripped her body, and she grew weaker by the day. Chronic diarrhea sapped her strength, and she often lay for hours in silence, barely able to speak. On November 17th, 1558, surrounded by her attendants, Mary Tudor took her final breath at the age of 42. Yet death did not bring peace. When her body was prepared for burial, those who saw her reported something strange. Her once pale skin had turned a deep, dark shade, almost black in places. The discoloration spread over her face and body, shocking those present. Some claimed it was a mark of God's wrath. Others whispered of poison. Whatever the cause, the transformation was unsettling enough to ensure that Mary I's death will remain a subject of speculation for centuries to come. The strange blackening of Mary I's body after death sparked an immediate flurry of speculation. In the 16th century, such discoloration was often interpreted as a sign of poisoning. Courtiers, servants, and even foreign ambassadors began quietly passing the rumor along. Had England's queen been murdered? Mary had no shortage of enemies. Protestants reviled her for the burnings that had taken place during her reign. Many of her nobles resented her Spanish marriage, fearing England's independence had been compromised. Even some Catholics were dissatisfied, believing she had failed to restore papal authority fully. If someone had wanted Mary gone, the method could have been subtle. Arsenic, a common poison in Renaissance courts, could cause symptoms remarkably similar to the illness she endured: stomach pain, weakness, and gradual wasting. Chronic exposure over months could also lead to skin discoloration after death. Her blackened face, lips, and fingernails seemed to fit the theory perfectly. Supporters of the poisoning theory pointed to her meals, which were prepared and served by many hands. Access to her food or drink would not have been difficult for someone inside the palace kitchens or among her servants. Poisoning had been a weapon in political intrigues across Europe, from the Borgias in Italy to the Valois in France. Why not in Tudor England? But there were counter-arguments. Mary's symptoms were also consistent with severe illnesses common in the period. Tuberculosis, certain cancers, and chronic liver disease could cause similar wasting and discoloration. The blackening might have been a result of post-mortem changes, natural decomposition in the cold, damp climate of London, perhaps worsened by an underlying condition. Still, the rumor of poison refused to die. Philip of Spain was a prime suspect in some minds. Had he wished to remove his ailing, childless wife to make way for a more politically advantageous marriage? He had, after all, with another woman within a few years of Mary's death. But there was no proof, and Philip publicly mourned her passing, sending orders for masses to be said for her soul. Others looked closer to home. Perhaps an ambitious courtier eager for Elizabeth's succession, or a Protestant agent working to speed the Queen's death. Even Elizabeth herself was whispered about, though no evidence has ever surfaced to support such claims. Foreign observers were fascinated. The Venetian ambassador wrote home about the Queen's deep discoloration and noted how quickly her body was buried, as if to hide something. Modern historians remain divided. Without the body, sealed in her tomb at Westminster Abbey, there is no way to test for toxins. The blackened skin could have many explanations, both natural and sinister. Yet the dramatic transformation in death ensured that Mary's passing would forever be wrapped in suspicion. Her funeral proceeded with solemn grandeur, but even in the shadow of the Abbey's candles, whispers of murder followed her coffin. The Queen was gone, but the mystery of how she left this world had only just begun. While some suspected poison, others in Mary I's time believed her blackened corpse was the mark of a curse, divine or otherwise. For a deeply religious age, her death carried symbolic weight. Protestants saw it as God's judgment for the burnings of heretics, a final condemnation of the Queen who had sent so many to the flames. Preachers wasted no time weaving her demise into sermons. To them, the blackening was a visible sign of the Queen's soul being stained by sin. They drew parallels to biblical figures struck down by God's wrath. This narrative spread quickly, especially among those eager to see Elizabeth take the throne and England swing back toward Protestantism. Catholics, on the other hand, rejected such interpretations. To them, Mary had died a faithful servant of Rome, steadfast even in the face of public hatred. But whispers of supernatural curse persisted in both camps, and the more the story spread, the more embellished it became. One legend claimed that during Wyatt's rebellion in 1554, Mary had cursed herself by swearing an oath that she would see England restored Catholicism, even if it burned me black. Whether she ever uttered such words is doubtful, but in the mind of her enemies, the supposed prophecy had come true. Beyond divine punishment, there were murmurs of witchcraft. Witch trials were not uncommon in Tudor England, and any unexplained event could quickly be attributed to sorcery. Some claimed a Protestant sorcerer had cursed the Queen's womb, causing her phantom pregnancies, and that the same curse had blackened her body at death. Superstition thrived in the absence of medical understanding. Few understood how diseases could ravage the body or why skin might discolor after death. In the cold, damp air of November, Mary's corpse might have suffered from certain chemical reactions during decomposition. But to Tudor minds, such changes demanded a moral explanation. Mary herself had been prone to interpreting events in the language of divine will. Throughout her reign, she believed her mission to restore Catholicism was divinely ordained, and her setbacks were often seen as tests from God. Had she been alive to witness her own post-mortem transformation, she might have searched Scripture for meaning rather than a physician's diagnosis. In the end, whether by poison, disease, or supernatural intervention, the effect was the same. Mary I's death became a story, and that story was molded by the politics of the age. The blackened Queen became a symbol, to some of tyranny punished, to others of faith martyred. And like all symbols, her image could be shaped to serve the needs of those who told it. Mary's funeral arrangements raised more eyebrows than they calmed. In an age when royal burials could be drawn-out affairs, her interment was arranged with unusual haste. Less than 3 weeks after her death, the Queen's coffin was sealed in Westminster Abbey on December 14, 1558. The official explanation was that winter weather and her worsening decomposition made a swift burial necessary. Yet to some observers, this seemed like an attempt to hide her condition from further scrutiny. Foreign ambassadors noted how few people were allowed to see the body, and those who did claim her appearance was unsettling. The funeral procession itself was a display of solemn grandeur, draped in black velvet. The coffin was borne on a chariot, flanked by banners bearing Mary's arms. Mourners walked in silence, the air heavy with incense and the slow tolling of bells. A life-size effigy of Mary, dressed in regal robes and wearing a crown, was placed atop the coffin, a Tudor tradition meant to represent the monarch in life. The Abbey's service was conducted with full Catholic rites, though it was clear that Protestant England was waiting impatiently for Elizabeth's coronation. In fact, Elizabeth had already been proclaimed queen on the very day of Mary's death, and her supporters saw the funeral as little more than a formality before a new, brighter era began. Mary's burial place was significant. She was laid to rest in the Lady Chapel of Westminster Abbey, a spot that would later see her half-sister Elizabeth buried in the same tomb. Ironically, the two women who had been rivals in life would lie together in death, their shared tombstone bearing Elizabeth's name far more prominently. Contemporary accounts suggest that the coffin was not open for viewing once sealed, which was unusual for a monarch. The lack of public display added fuel to rumors. Was it simply the condition of the body, or was there more that officials didn't want the public to see? In the weeks following her burial, gossip continued to circulate, some claiming the coffin had been lined with lead to contain the odor, others insisting that her face was so blackened that no effigy could have done it justice. For her supporters, the funeral was a dignified farewell to a misunderstood queen. For her detractors, it was a quiet disposal of a failed ruler. But for those who loved a mystery, it was another chapter in an already strange and unsettling death. The speed of Mary's burial was matched only by the speed of Elizabeth's rise to power. On November 17th, the moment Mary breathed her last, Elizabeth was proclaimed queen. For many in England, it felt like the end of a long, oppressive winter and the dawn of a new age. Bells rang across London. Crowds gathered to cheer the new monarch, hailing her as a savior who would restore Protestantism and lead England to glory. Mary's death was politically convenient for Elizabeth's supporters. With no husband to claim the throne and no living child, the succession passed smoothly. But some couldn't help noticing how neatly the transition occurred, as though those in Elizabeth's circle had been preparing for it. The two half-sisters had a complicated relationship. Mary had imprisoned Elizabeth during her reign, suspecting her of involvement in Protestant plots. Though Elizabeth outwardly professed loyalty, she had little reason to mourn deeply. Still, she attended her sister's funeral with all the dignity expected of a monarch. In public, Elizabeth spoke respectfully of Mary, praising her for ruling in a difficult time. In private, she moved swiftly to undo much of her sister's work. The burnings of Protestants ceased. The Latin Mass was replaced by English services. Exiles returned from Geneva, and Parliament passed laws re-establishing the Church of England. Foreign powers noted the contrast. Spain, which had once been bound to England by Mary's marriage to Philip, now found itself on uneasy terms with Elizabeth. France, where Mary, Queen of Scots, posed a Catholic threat to Elizabeth's throne, watched with interest. In this shifting landscape, Mary's death and the manner of it became a talking point in diplomatic correspondence. Ambassadors speculated about her health in their reports. Some describe her as wasted by disease in the final months. Others hinted darkly at poison. The story of her blackened corpse crossed borders, told with increasing embellishment. By the time it reached Rome, some versions claimed she had died screaming in pain, her skin turning black before witnesses' eyes. In truth, no definitive cause of death was ever recorded. The official account remained vague, noting only a prolonged illness. Without modern medicine, it was easy for rumor to replace fact. Elizabeth's reign quickly overshadowed her sister's legacy. Victories like the defeat of the Spanish Armada, the flowering of Elizabethan culture, and the image of the Virgin Queen would dominate history books. Mary, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale, a ruler defined by her failures, her bloody persecution of Protestants, and her strange, unsettling death. Yet in some corners of England and across Catholic Europe, Mary was remembered as a devout queen who had sacrificed popularity for her faith. In those circles, the blackening of her body was not a mark of damnation, but a tragic, misunderstood ending to a pious life. If Mary I's body were exhumed today, forensic science could likely solve the mystery that has lingered for centuries. Tests for arsenic, mercury, and other toxins to confirm or dismiss the theory of poison. Examination of her bones might reveal signs of chronic disease, perhaps the cancer that some historians suspect. But no such examination has ever been authorized. Mary's remains lie undisturbed in Westminster Abbey, sealed in the shared tomb with Elizabeth. To open, it would be both politically and religiously sensitive, not to mention disruptive to one of England's most famous burial sites. Without an autopsy, historians are left to work from scant records. Contemporary descriptions of her illness mention fever, weakness, and swelling. Some noted her dropsy, or fluid retention, which could point to kidney failure or liver disease. Others recorded her bouts of melancholy, suggesting a long decline rather than sudden murder. One compelling theory is that Mary suffered from ovarian cancer. This would explain her phantom pregnancies, her abdominal swelling, and the gradual deterioration of her health. Certain cancers can cause a kind of discoloration that might have been exaggerated by decomposition. Another theory focuses on porphyria, a genetic disorder that may have affected other members of the Tudor family. Porphyria can cause abdominal pain, neurological issues, and skin problems, and its attacks can be triggered by stress. It could also lead to darkening of the skin. Still, the poison theory refuses to fade entirely. In part, that's because it fits the political climate of the time. The Tudor court was a nest of intrigue, and assassination by subtle means was far from unheard of. Without evidence to disprove it, the story remains alive, a tantalizing what-if that fuels documentaries, novels, and whispered debates among history buffs. The absence of an autopsy has allowed Mary's death to live in a liminal space between fact and legend. She exists in the public imagination not just as a queen, but as a historical mystery, a puzzle that will likely remain unsolved unless her tomb is opened. For now, all we have are theories, and each says as much about the storyteller as it does about the subject. Some want Mary to be a victim of foul play. Others prefer to see her as a casualty of natural illness, undone by her own failing body. In either case, the end result was the same. England gained a new queen, and history gained a riddle wrapped in black velvet. Mary I's reign lasted just over 5 years, but her death ensured her a place in history far beyond her political achievements or failures. She has been remembered as Bloody Mary, the queen who burned hundreds of Protestants, also as a woman who clung to her faith despite overwhelming opposition. Her blackened corpse became the most enduring image of her final days, overshadowing her earlier life. For some, it was proof of divine judgment. For others, a tragic end to a tragic reign. In either telling, the mystery became inseparable from her identity. Elizabeth's long and glittering rule pushed Mary further into the shadows. The shared tomb in Westminster Abbey symbolizes this perfectly. Elizabeth's grand monument dominates, while Mary's name is etched modestly below. Visitors rarely come to pay respects to Mary alone. Yet in recent years, historians have begun reassessing her. Some argue that Mary was more competent than her reputation suggests, that her marriage alliance with Spain had strategic merit, and that her religious policies, while harsh, were not unprecedented for the time. Others have highlighted her personal resilience, surviving childhood upheaval, political imprisonment, and repeated betrayal. Still, no reassessment can fully strip away the fascination with her death. The image of the blackened queen remains irresistible, a blend of history and horror that appeals to both scholars and storytellers. Documentaries dramatize it, novels embellish it, and YouTube historians build entire narratives around it. In the end, perhaps that is Mary's truest legacy, to remain unsolved. In life, she fought desperately to control England's religious future. In death, she lost control of her own story. The mystery of her final days has been rewritten countless times, each version reflecting the fears and desires of the age that tells it. Somewhere beneath the Abbey stone floor, Mary the First lies in silence, her secrets locked away in bone and dust. Whether she died of cancer, poison, or some rare disease, we may never know. What we do know is that her passing marked a turning point in English history, the moment the Marian experiment ended and the Elizabethan age began. The candles at her funeral burned out long ago. The whispers in the court have faded into the pages of history. But the question remains, as compelling now as it was in 1558. Was the blackened queen a victim of fate or of human hands? Until the day her tomb is opened, Mary I's death will remain exactly what her enemies and admirers alike made it, a death wrapped in mystery. History hides its darkest secrets in plain sight, but only if you dare to look closer. Don't let this mystery fade into the shadows. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and step with us into forgotten chambers of past.